Welcome back to ChapterCast. Today, we're diving into Chapter 8, Respondent Conditioning, one of the building blocks of psychology and behavior analysis. You've probably heard of Pavlov's dogs, but did you know respondent conditioning is happening around us every single day? From feeling hungry when you hear the microwave beep, to getting nervous before a big test, respondent conditioning helps explain how neutral things in our environment gain power to trigger automatic responses. In this video, we'll break down the core concepts, explore real-world examples, and connect the science to your everyday life. Let's jump in. So picture this. You're sitting on your couch, minding your own business, maybe watching some cat videos, I don't know. Then a pizza commercial comes on. You see that slow-motion cheese pull, you hear the sizzle, and suddenly your mouth is watering. You weren't even hungry a minute ago. Now you're rummaging through your delivery apps like your life depends on it. What just happened? Did that commercial cast some kind of delicious spell on you? Well, sort of. It's all thanks to something called respondent conditioning. It's a fancy term, I know. But it's happening to all of us all the time. It's the secret science behind so many of our automatic reactions. Think about it. Why does the sound of a dentist's drill make your whole body tense up, even if you're just watching it in a movie? Why does a certain song on the radio instantly transport you back to your high school prom, complete with all the awkward feelings? It's not magic, it's just your brain making connections. It links one thing to another, and another, until just hearing a sound can make you feel happy, scared, really want a pizza. This whole thing sounds complicated, but I promise it's not. We're going to break it all down. We'll talk about dogs, bells, rules. We'll look at how our emotions get tangled up in all of this, creating what are called conditioned emotional responses. Yes, that's why you get a little flutter in your stomach when your crush's name pops up on your phone. See? Science. It's everywhere, explaining why we do the weird and wonderful things we do. So, stick with me. We're going on a little journey into our own minds. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. And by the end, you'll be able to look at that pizza commercial and say, aha, I know what you're doing to my salivary glands. You'll be the smartest person on the couch, I guarantee it. And you might still order the pizza, but at least you'll know why. Let's get into it. All right, let's get to the good stuff. The term respondent conditioning was made famous by a guy named Ivan Pavlov. You've probably heard of him. He was a scientist who did some famous experiments with dogs. And no, he wasn't teaching them to dance, although that would have been amazing. He noticed that his dogs would start drooling when they saw food. That makes sense, right? Food is an unconditioned stimulus, meaning it naturally makes something happen. The drooling is the unconditioned response. It's an automatic reflex, no training needed. A dog sees a steak, it drools. I see a steak, I drool. It's just how we're wired. But then Pavlov did something clever. He started ringing a bell right before he gave the dogs their food. At first, the bell meant nothing. It was just a sound, a neutral thing. Bell, then food. Bell, then food. The dog's brain started to connect the dots. They learned that the bell meant food was coming. So, what happened? They started drooling just from hearing the bell, even when there was no food in sight. That bell became what we call a conditioned stimulus. It went from being a neutral sound to a powerful trigger. And the drooling that happened because of the bell, that's called the conditioned response. It's a learned reaction to a previously neutral thing. The dog wasn't born drooling at the sound of a bell. It learned to do that. This whole process, pairing a neutral thing with something that already causes a reaction until the neutral thing causes the reaction all by itself, is respondent conditioning. It's about our reflexes, the things our body does automatically, like jumping at a loud noise, sweating when we're nervous, drooling. These are called respondent behaviors. They are involuntary, you don't choose to do them. Now this is different from what's called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is about operant behaviors, the things we choose to do. It's about consequences. For example, a dog learns to sit because it gets a treat afterward. Sitting is a choice. You train for a marathon because you want the reward of finishing. That's a choice. Respondent conditioning isn't about choices or rewards. It's about reflexes and associations. It's the automatic stuff happening under the surface. It's the oops, I'm blushing, or yikes, my heart is racing part of life. So, we know that pairing a bell with food can make a dog drool. But does it matter when you ring the bell? Oh, you bet it does. Timing is everything. It's like telling a joke. The punchline has to come at the right moment. In respondent conditioning, the timing between the neutral stimulus, the bell, and the unconditioned stimulus, the food, is super important. There are a few ways it can happen: trace, delay, simultaneous, backward. First up, delay conditioning. You start with the neutral stimulus, say, by playing a specific song, and while the song is still playing, you bring out the delicious pizza. The song and the pizza overlap. The brain has an easy time connecting the two because they happen together. This is the gold standard for creating a strong conditioned response. Next, we have trace conditioning. The neutral stimulus starts and ends before the unconditioned stimulus appears. Imagine you flash a light, turn it off, and then a few seconds later, a puff of air makes you blink. There's a gap in between. Your brain has to hold a memory, a trace of the light. The shorter the gap, the better. If you wait too long, the brain will have already moved on. Light? What light? Oh, look, a squirrel! Then there's simultaneous conditioning. The neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus happen at the exact same time. The bell rings and the food appears at the same moment. You'd think this would be effective, but it's actually not. The bell doesn't predict anything. It's just extra noise while you're eating. The brain often just ignores it. Finally, backward conditioning. The unconditioned stimulus comes before the neutral one. Food is presented first, followed by the bell. This usually doesn't work at all. The bell doesn't signal anything about the food. It rings after the party is already over. The bell becomes a signal that the food is finished, not that it's coming. The dog is already eating and its brain is like, thanks for the bell, I guess, but I'm a little busy here. So as you can see, timing really is everything. Okay, so we've got the basics down. Bell plus food equals drooling. Simple enough. But what if we took it a step further? This is where higher order conditioning comes into play. It's like a chain reaction of learning. Once that bell has become a conditioned stimulus, it can be used to condition another neutral stimulus. It's like the bell has graduated and is now the teacher. It doesn't need the food anymore to do its work. Let's go back to our furry friends. The dog now reliably drools when it hears the bell. Now what if we introduce a new neutral thing? Let's say a flashing light. We flash the light and then we ring the bell. No food is involved. Light, then bell. Light, then bell. The dog's brain starts to think the light means the bell is coming and the bell means drool time. After enough pairings, the dog will start drooling at just the flashing light. The light has become a second conditioned stimulus. This is higher order conditioning. We've transferred the bell's power to the light, all without using the original unconditioned stimulus, the food. The response becomes weaker with each step, but it remains present. Like a photocopy of a photocopy, a bit fainter each time. This happens in daily life. Maybe your grandma always wore a certain perfume. The perfume is linked to the happy feelings you get from her. If she loved a particular store, the store's name could get paired with that perfume and feelings. Soon you might feel warmth just walking past that store. That's higher order conditioning in action. It's how our world becomes layered with meaning and emotion. A web of connections between neutral things and powerful feelings. Our personal histories shape the emotional meaning of the world around us. Our emotional landscape is a giant, complex map of these learned responses. So far, we've talked a lot about drooling dogs, blinking eyes. But respondent conditioning isn't just about physical reflexes. It's also a huge player in our emotional lives. Love, fear, happiness, anxiety can be learned through this process. When an emotion becomes the conditioned response, we call it a conditioned emotional response, or CER. Likes, dislikes, fears, joys. They are the reason a song can make you cry, a smell can make you happy. Let's talk about the scary stuff first. Imagine a little kid, let's call him Albert, who loves playing with a fuzzy white rat. The rat is neutral for him. Then a scientist makes a super loud, scary noise every time Albert reaches for the rat. The loud noise, unconditioned stimulus, makes him scared and cry, unconditioned response. After a few times, Albert becomes terrified of the white rat. The rat has evolved from a toy to a conditioned stimulus that triggers fear, the conditioned response. This was a real, famous, and very mean experiment. This is how many fears and phobias are born. Maybe you had a bad experience with a dog as a kid. Now, just seeing a dog can make your heart race and palms sweat. The dog has become a conditioned stimulus for fear. Or think about positive emotions. The smell of freshly baked cookies can be a conditioned stimulus that makes you feel happy and safe. It may remind you of visiting your grandpa's house. The love and comfort you felt then are now linked to that smell. A warm CR. These CERs happen constantly. A notification sound from your favorite person can trigger excitement. A CER. Driving past the site of a past accident and feeling a pit in your stomach? That's a CER. Our emotional landscape is a giant, complex map of these learned responses. A web of connections between neutral things and powerful feelings. Our personal histories shape the emotional meaning of the world around us. Every sight, sound, and smell carries the potential to transport us back to moments of joy, fear, love, or sadness. This is the profound power of conditioned emotional responses. They make our world deeply personal and emotionally rich. So if we can learn these responses, can we unlearn them? Is little Albert doomed to be afraid of white rats forever? Good news, he's not. There's a process for that, and it's called respondent extinction. It sounds dramatic, but it's actually pretty simple. Extinction happens when you repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus, or CS, without the unconditioned stimulus, or US. The brain slowly learns that the old connection is broken. The bell no longer signals food. The rat is no longer followed by a scary noise. Let's go back to Pavlov's dogs. They're drooling every time they hear the bell. Pavlov would ring the bell over and over without ever bringing out the food. At first, the dogs would drool a lot. After the 10th ring with no food, maybe they'd drool a little less. After the 20th, even less. Eventually, they would stop drooling at the sound of the bell altogether. The conditioned response has been extinguished. The bell is just a boring, neutral sound again. But here's a weird little twist. Give the dog a break for a day or two. Then you come back and ring the bell again. What might happen is spontaneous recovery. Out of nowhere, the dog might drool a little bit. The response comes back, just not as strongly as before. It's like the brain has a little memory of the old connection and decides to give it one more try. Hey, you ringing that bell? Just checking if we're still doing the food thing. If you continue the extinction process by ringing the bell without food, this recovered response will disappear much faster than the first time. You might see a few of these spontaneous recovery episodes, but each time the response will be weaker and disappear more quickly. It shows that extinction isn't about completely erasing a memory. It's more about learning a new rule. The bell used to mean food, but now it doesn't. The old learning is still in there somewhere, but the new learning is stronger and takes over. Okay, so the dog has learned that a specific bell means food, but what happens if you ring a slightly different bell, or a doorbell, or a bicycle bell? This is where two additional key concepts come into play: generalization and discrimination. They are like two sides of the same coin. They help us navigate a world full of things that are similar but not exactly the same. It's how our brains decide whether to react or not. First, let's talk about generalization. A response spreads from one stimulus to other, similar stimuli. After being conditioned to fear a white rat, little Albert didn't just fear that one rat. He became afraid of other furry white things too. Santa Claus beard, fuzzy rabbit, white fur coat. His fear had generalized. The more similar the new thing is to the original conditioned stimulus, the more likely generalization will happen. It's the brain's way of playing it safe. This new thing is a lot like that other thing that was bad, so I'm just going to react to be safe. We can't be afraid of everything similar to something bad. We have to learn to tell the difference. That's discrimination. It's the opposite of generalization. You react to one specific stimulus, but not to similar ones. This happens when one stimulus is consistently paired with the unconditioned stimulus, while other similar stimuli are not. For example, if Pavlov's dogs only ever got food after a bell with a very specific pitch, but not after any other bells, they would learn to discriminate. They would learn to drool only at the food bell and ignore all the others. Discrimination is about learning to be precise. You might jump when you hear a car backfire because it sounds like a gunshot, which is generalization, but you don't jump when you hear a balloon pop because you've learned to tell the difference, which is discrimination. Life is a constant dance between these two processes. We generalize to stay safe and apply what we've learned to new situations, and we discriminate to fine-tune our responses and navigate the specific details of our world. Person happily petting a golden retriever but looking cautiously at a chihuahua, illustrating discrimination. So, why does respondent conditioning sometimes happen in a flash and other times take forever? Why do some people develop a phobia after one scary event while others don't? Well, it turns out that several factors can influence how strong and how fast this learning happens. It's not just about pairing two things together. First, the intensity of the stimuli matters a lot. A more intense unconditioned stimulus, or US, will produce a stronger and faster conditioning. Think about it. Getting a tiny shock from static electricity, which is a weak US, is less likely to create a lasting fear of doorknobs than getting a major electric shock from a faulty wire, which is a strong US. The same goes for the neutral stimulus. A more salient stimulus, meaning it's more noticeable or intense, will make a better conditioned stimulus, or CS. A loud, strange bell is more likely to be noticed and linked to food than a very soft, quiet hum that blends into the background. The timing, which we already talked about, is also a huge factor. Remember, delay conditioning, where the CS starts just before the US, is usually the most effective method. The more predictive the CS is, the stronger the learning will be. If the bell always and only comes before the food, the brain learns that connection very quickly. But if the bell sometimes rings without food, or food sometimes appears without the bell, the connection will be much weaker and harder to form. Consistency is key. Our own personal history with a potential stimulus also plays a part. There's a concept called habituation, where if you've been exposed to a neutral stimulus many times by itself, it's harder to condition it later. If a dog has heard a bell ring 1,000 times and nothing ever happened, its brain has learned that the bell is irrelevant. It will take a lot more work to then teach the dog that the bell now means food. So novelty helps. A brand new stimulus makes a much better candidate for conditioning. We've touched on this a bit, but let's really clear it up. Respondent conditioning and operant conditioning are the two main ways we learn, but they are very different. It's like the difference between sneezing and telling a joke. One is an automatic reflex, and the other is a voluntary action you choose to do to get a reaction. Understanding the difference is key to understanding why we behave the way we do. It all comes down to what is being controlled, our reflexes or our choices. Respondent conditioning, as we've seen, is all about those automatic, involuntary behaviors called respondent behaviors. These are the things your body does without you thinking about it. Your heart rate, your pupils dilating, sweating, blushing, and drooling. The whole process is about what comes before the behavior. A stimulus in the environment, or the CS, triggers a reflex, the CR. It's a stimulus-response relationship. You are reacting to the world. Operant conditioning, on the other hand, is concerned with voluntary behaviors, also known as operant behaviors. These are the things you choose to do: walking, talking, pressing a button, studying for a test. This type of learning is all about what comes after the behavior. It's about consequences. It's a response-consequence relationship. You are acting on the world to get something. And that's how we use this stuff in the real world to help people. It's not just for the dogs anymore. It's for all of us. And that wraps up Chapter 8 on respondent conditioning. We explored how neutral stimuli become conditioned, how generalization and discrimination shape our responses, and why extinction doesn't always mean behaviors vanish for good. Understanding respondent conditioning provides a solid foundation for understanding how behavior develops and changes across various settings. If this helped you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a fellow student. Also, drop a comment with the next chapter you'd like us to cover. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and let ChapterCast make studying a little easier every day.